Student guided notes. Where do you find this stuff? Of course, like always, we have the Google Classroom. I'm going to go ahead and present a tab for you. Your Google Classroom, and all three classes that I have today should have this. All right, your photosynthesis guided notes, for e-learning. So you should see this in Unit 3 Energy. It should be pretty much close to the top. So you can open this up and you'll find that you have a bunch of blanks, not just for my, mental state, like my brain. You'll have basically have this kind of thing to fill in. And yeah, there's 11 slides. It should take, according to conventional wisdom, only a few minutes. I did include, in case you're wondering on this video, Google Docs. This should be the ADP, ATP model of stuff that you were filling in for my first part of this presentation. And look how slow my internet is. It's great. Yeah, I love storms. But I'm not going to waste time, but take the time to wait for that. So that's getting organized for your day. So I'm going to go ahead and present. You should have those notes in front of you. I'm going to go ahead and present my screen to get through these guided notes and kind of give you some feedback on what this stuff really, bring this stuff to life, I guess. So your slideshow. Here we go. So photosynthesis notes. What a groovy concept that is. So we're going to look at how do plants convert light energy into chemical energy, glucose. Okay, so that's the chemical energy that plants use, the sugar glucose. It's producing that. And what is the difference? These are the questions you should be able to, general overarching questions. What is the difference between plants? What is the difference between the light-dependent reactions, that should be a blank, and the light-independent reactions? So one reaction in photosynthesis that takes place in the chloroplast will depend on light, and the second reaction that we talk about is it doesn't need light. It's called the light-independent. It's called the Calvin cycle. It's called the dark reaction. All the above would apply if you see any one of those on the test. All right, your overview. This is almost like, plugging into a cord and charging your cell phone. That's what these plants can do, and we gotta use this energy similarly. But all organisms, like the battery, thing on your ADP, ATP, that's kind of what the battery fill up and charge up kind of does for you. So all organisms need a constant energy source to survive. Okay, constant energy source to survive. So the ultimate source of energy for most life on Earth is the sun. All right, without it, we'd be like the Matrix. In the real world, we can have the sun. Not only is it fun to see the sun, it looks pretty outside. Some people like the rain, but life is dependent on it. Photosynthesis is the overall process. I don't really have to read this for you, but it is used to chemically convert water and carbon dioxide into chemical energy stored in simple sugars, such as glucose. All right, so that's a chemical equation. You should be able to, by the end of this lesson or unit, to write down the chemical equation for photosynthesis. C6H12O6 balances 6 of those. And that's the chemical equation, or the chemical formula for sugar. But the equation states you need water, you need air, you need what? You need to produce oxygen and sugars to be used elsewhere in the plant or body. We don't do photosynthesis, but you can argue that we get energy from the sun individually. So that's the goal of plants, is to make this. Now, where does it occur? It's in the chloroplast, which is a membrane-bound organelle that we know from the test is a eukaryotic cell inside that cell. So chloroplast, that organelle, exists in plant cells. And sometimes in other autotrophic organisms. So autotrophic, it makes its own energy automatically from a trophic source like light. Photography sounds like autotrophic. You can think of that. All right, so that's the overview. Now, the structure of the chloroplast, which is the organelle that captures light energy, it's right here. We're going to draw those. You know how I like diagramming. Some people get a good view or overview on what this diagram should look like. You have the outer membrane-bound organelle membrane, right? You have the inner membrane, so it's very well kept. These rice-looking stacked, pieces here, and they make it look like kind of a pancake layer. It's called the granum. The spaces in between us, stroma location of phase 2. So if you had to look at this, I'm going to explain more. One of these pancakes or rice-like structures is called a thylakoid in the stack of the granum, location of phase 1, which is a process of photosynthesis. So the space you can think of happens with a dark reaction in the stroma. The light reaction or light dependent reaction it happens within these granum. So that's kind of what you're doing. You have the ATP cycle, you have NADPH cycle. It kind of goes this way. That's usually how it's described, but it's a little more complicated than that. So chloroplast contains two main compartments: thylakoids, flattened sac-like membranes or green pancakes. Stacks of thylakoids are called grana. All right. So that's kind of a little different than that. That's a stack of one, a stack of thylakoids. This is a granum, I guess, one of the singular. That's, this is the plural. Fluid-filled spaces outside the stroma, the grana, sorry, are called stroma. They're basically spaces in between us. That's part of the lyric from the song. Space between. Syrup, basically. It's kind of cytoplasmy. All right, the chloroplast structure review. All right, so we have a thylakoid. All right, so that should be pointed right in there. We have a stack of thylakoids in the granum. That's kind of should be pointing a little closer to one of these little structures, and then one of these little structures, like a thylakoid. So it's kind of off on the graphics. I think it's the translation from my old computer to the new one, from the new one, the graphics. So now we have, thylakoid membrane, the outside of the membrane. Stuff happens in that, actually. The stroma, of course, is a space between these things. And you have interconnected weaving stuff, and that is not the thylakoid. So in these thylakoid membranes, you have photosystems. And we don't really go into that, but it's an interesting little breakdown of how photosynthesis, of what you're usually taught, is extremely more complicated. And we really got this as humans a good start on our solar panel discoveries and inventions. All right, chlorophyll and other pigments. So we have pigments, of course. We have to have color, right? So that's what pigments are for. Now, these pigments absorb the light, and they're colored molecules called pigments. So they're in the areas in the thylakoid membrane, you have these molecules. So that's kind of how this goes. If you see this is the light absorption by photosynthetic pigments. We're getting graphically, oriented here. You have chlorophyll A. You need to know that it's in the blue. Chlorophyll B. It's in the green. And carotenoids. That's of course in the orange. It sounds like a carrot. And you see these on the spectrum. The light absorption of the chlorophyll A, you can think of a blue light, violet blue. It gets most of the absorption in this area of the spectrum. Your carotenoids kind of get the highest level as you go towards this. And this is estimated absorption by percentage. This is the wavelength, of course, the light spectrum. Roy G. Biv going this way. I don't know how you make something sound like that this way though. Or Vib G. Yar. That's the opposite. All right, chlorophyll B, a lot of absorption near the green areas by a percentage. So when it's going to reflect color. So most common pigments in plants is called chlorophyll. except for the carotenoids. Chlorophyll reflects green light, so that's why plants look green. Yeah, that's basically how we get this. It's the pigments. It's not just painted. All right. So get to know this graph. Visualize it, and you see that down the line here. We're getting more absorption, and you notice how you think it would be the percentage of absorption for green stuff would be higher during the green and yellow areas. Well, that means it's reflecting at this point. All right, so that's that's what you gotta know. So plants have accessory pigments. They accessorize. So if they're green, they have nice off-colored green to match with that, with the shoes and the belt, possibly the earrings. No, accessory pigments that allow for them to absorb other wavelengths of light. So it has other stuff, just other than the three you're learning, that allows some color. So the fall, winter, some people like that. I'm a big Thanksgiving guy because it's food. It's your job during Thanksgiving is to eat food and cook it. But some people love that stuff. That's why I love it. And then Christmas is basically eating the dessert. So Thanksgiving is the food, dessert is Christmas, because many sugary items are had. Chlorophyll becomes less prominent. Okay. So allowing the accessory pigments to be seen and allow plants to keep photosynthesizing. So it needs some different stuff to keep plants alive during those wintry, colder months. And there's not as much light because the day gets a little shorter with sunlight. That makes sense, right? Clear as mud. So that photosynthesis, or plants, the process of that requires sunlight energy. Now it's not just a ray of light. There's photons in that sunlight. Photons hit these thylakoid membranes through, and then they kind of activate these electrons to start the process to get energy, to make energy, to get energy, to make energy, to get it. You're going to get this a lot more. So carbon dioxide and water produce glucose and oxygen. So we have CO2. There's 6 of them. This is a balanced equation. 6 water molecules. So 6 CO2 plus 6 H2O. You add some photon energy there, and you get the glucose molecule with 6 oxygen. So that's going to be your equation. Now, when we do photosynthesis, cellular respiration later from the mitochondria, you just change the arrow and kind of get rid of the light because it's not as necessary. All right. Mental note. You have to know this. All right. Inside out, backwards, forwards, every day of the week and twice on Sunday. All right. So fill in your blanks there. Stop the video if you need to. So this can be an 8-hour video if it, take time. And they say we have to have a 40-minute video, but if you stop it, it goes longer. Photosynthesis occurs in 2 phases, as we talked about before. We have the light-dependent reactions. Light energy is converted into chemical energy. That's by photons. Now, light-independent reactions, chemical energy is used to make synthesized glucose. Make/synthesize. So yeah, that means light independent does not use light. It's independent of light. It's a dark reaction. It's the Calvin cycle. All the above apply. Light dependent, I don't think there's another name for it's needs light to react. And your little diagrams, as we see on the board, they're usually too small to see in the back, which why it should be a front runner. Leaf tissue layer. That's breaking down what that is. It blows it up to look like this. Okay, magnified, if you will. Plant cell. You have your chloroplast, your organelles. We're blowing that up like we saw before. And these are your parts. You should be able to label those and find out where these reactions take place. All right. Summary of photosynthesis. All right. And this is a commonly used diagram. You'll see this usually in different ways. Right, your photon energy or photon blasting these membranes for the light dependent reactions in these grana. You have HBO being taken in, um, and then we go through this to help this thing go along, and then we break off the hydrogens that become ions to be used in different parts of the light dependent reaction to yield two oxygens. So that's what the waste product of the photosynthesis is, that the chloroplast doesn't need for these reactions or gets rid of. So yeah, you're breathing in plant waste. So from that, we have used this ion photon energy creation to make ATP. Now, sugar is CO2 is not used on this part of the light dependent reaction, and sugar is not made from this particular reaction. We have to get an ATP um, into the light independent, the dark reaction or Calvin cycle, and then we use NADPH and a hydrogen ion. So we're taking some of these things with us, and you're getting rid of a phosphate, just like our ATP ADP cycle. That's why I did that first. All right, so now we deposit, we break off, and we now have ADP with a phosphate unattached, and we notice we lose the other hydrogen ion, and we're NADP. All right, now the confusing part is when you get to cellular respiration, there's a NAD plus and then an NADP, NADH. It's a little more confusing, but you'll know based on that chemical makeup that what we're in is photosynthesis or cell respiration, even though they're very similar, is backwards. And there's your CO2 molecule. Okay, right here, you can see my little cursor there, hopefully. So yeah, and so we're using that in the dark reaction. We take some NADPH, a little breaking off energy. We synthesize some carbohydrates or glucose and other complex molecules. And other complex molecules usually are used in this reaction to help this catalyze be synthesized from CO2. Notice there's 6 CO2s to make this one glucose molecule from the equation. All right, having some fun now. We're going to move into the next slide. Be careful. The excitement is around you. So light dependent reactions are light absorption. Okay. So not using light. They're I'm sorry, back that up. They're already using light. They're dependent upon light. So it absorbs light from the sun in the first step of photosynthesis, as you can see. Now this reaction relies on sunlight. It's almost stated twice, right? So I am going to say that, this occurs in the thylakoid membranes inside the chloroplast. They took away the requirement to learn that specific reaction in the membrane. All right. Water, sunlight, chlorophyll are needed. We just saw that. So water, sunlight, chlorophyll, are needed in this light dependent reaction. Oxygen is produced as a byproduct. It's a waste product into the atmosphere. And 2 ATP and 2 NADPH are made. All right, so that's what we get out of it. This is what is produced from the light dependent. This is what's needed. These are the reactants or the thing that we use to do the waste product from water. So this is what's produced. This is reactants. This is the products. Okay. Light dependent reactions continued, and this is not a blanks to fill in, or might be. So photosystem 2, this diagram, what are you looking at? I'll give you a second to guess. If you look at this, is the phosphate heads with the lipid tails. It looks like a membranous type structure, and it is a membranous type membrane. But what membrane it is, you have to know. It's a thylakoid membrane. And you have your photosystem. All right, what happens is this little photon hits. We have energy being from that as an activated electron, like I said before. H2O loses that electron, so you have 2 positive. You lose a negative, you get positive. 2 hydrogen ions, and you get half O2, which is interesting because you have 1 here. You can't have a full O2 because that doesn't make sense. You can't. It doesn't exist. You have to start with something to get something. It's almost like the law of conservation of matter. In fact, it is exactly that. So electron carriers are now used in these photosystems down the line here. It's kind of electron transportation chain, or ETC. All right, more light hits the photosystem 1. Notice how photosystem 2 becomes before photosystem 1. Explain that to me, someone who made that up. Um, Ferredoxin, final electron acceptor, and it's outside the thing, which is not as important. So we're using these electrons to, be excited by these photons that are hitting. So, maybe just think of this. You have an electron hanging out there from breaking off of a hydrogen oxygen, compound, and it kind of just rolls down. Oh, we got hit by a photon. We're excited now. We're excited now. We're excited now. Not as excited. Not, oh, we got hit by another proton and photon, and we're going to get excited. So it uses that. All right, because we have to synthesize a phosphorus into an ATP molecule with some type of energy generated out there. So you have to have energy to make energy, much like how we get electricity. Used to split water, so solar energy, it splits it apart. Photon action. Boom, boom, boom. As I said, it needs energy to split apart. We lose that stuff. Oxygen is a waste product. Absorbed, and so you're breathing waste from a plant. Absorbed by chloroplast, and two energy storing molecules, ATP and NADPH, are produced. That's your product of stuff. Now, light dependent, this is a long discussion on light dependent reactions. There's a lot involved, and this can go a lot longer as well for the purpose of knowing what photosynthesis is. So again, we're saying this is a repetition, so you get this a lot, and we're going to probably do quizzes and a Kahoot vocab for that, and re-emphasize and re-emphasize and review this. Draw it, see it, know it, love it. Light is absorbed by what? The chlorophyll pigments. Know that. It's not just absorbed by the chloroplast. There's a specific thing that does. Water taken by the roots is broken down into hydrogen ions, electrons, and oxygen gas. Right. You lose an electron, a negative electron, you get a positive. So we get a gas. So if we had to break down those little the parentheses sub S, it's a solid. Liquid is an L in the equation, and G is a gas. I don't know if you remember that from physical science. That is a chemical reaction, though. You have to determine if it's solid, liquid, or gas in a chemical formula and a chemical equation. So a hydrogen ion, electrons are used, and oxygen is released. Electrons are excited when struck by light, as I kind of demonstrated in the diagram. So this is the words that describe that diagram, basically. And become energized, absorbing this solar energy. All right, so this is telling you the photosystems again. Similar diagram. That was what we started with. Looking back at it, another view. The excited electrons enter the electron transport chain, ETC. And you'll see that cellular respiration in the mitochondria have an ETC as well. Series of proteins. That's what these the membrane proteins we studied. The integral proteins, the active transport, the active transport proton pumps or other pumps, potassium pumps, sodium pumps, those kind of things. The series of proteins within the thylakoid membrane that takes in the trapped solar energy. We get ATP from it, we use it, and just discard it as ADP. How? And after it's used in the dark reaction. At the end of ETC, the excited electrons in pairs are transported. We're going to stop at some point. I think after light dependent. Yeah, so we're getting into this. So we're going to stop right at light independent reactions when we get to this summary of photosynthesis. So that's kind of a lot, because when we get into, and this is going to get serious now on light dependence. See how much focus we have on this? When we get back on Monday, willing, we're going to get into what? This is a flash forward. You have, boom, this is the reactions for light independent. There's some definite things to go over here and get used to doing. We're going to dive into the light dependent reactions and get into what we're doing. See how these reactions are occurring and breaking it down more of what happens to these things. All right, so that isn't involved and a lot simpler than, I mean, a lot more difficult. We have some definite adding together of carbons to get and using enzymes to do stuff. So it definitely starts at step one and goes through step four, and you have to know some of these things, the sugars that are being synthesized, and of course it's a dehydration synthesis because we lose water basically. I mean, we use water, we break it apart. All right, so that concludes our brief discovery of the beginning of our light dependent reactions. And of course, we're going into the dark reactions or the light independent reactions later. Okay. So I'm making a note that we kind of stopped here. I don't want to go for another hour unless you really want to hear it. So, guys, I appreciate your attention. Your goal is to hand this in. Of course, there's some grace there. I'm not going to tell you that too much. So when you're done with this, go ahead and hand in those guided notes on those pages that I discussed. So when you do that, you're good to go. There's your attendance thing. And have any questions, message me. And I'm going to put grades in. Yes, I'm going to go back and look at late assignments and make determinations on those. So remember, when you do a late assignment or hand it in late, and I already graded it on a Friday, I'm not going to go back and quickly grade it on an individual basis until the end of the marking period, usually, unless I just have that regrading policy, or I'm sorry, regrading opportunity. So, guys, great job. If you haven't heard it today, I love you. Your parents love you, and let's get after it. And look forward to seeing you guys again. So take care. Have a great rest of the weekend.